And first of all, I'm just going to kick off with a bit of information. So my name is Antonia, and I am the Young Environmentalist Awards Project Officer, and I'll introduce you to our speaker in a few. But basically, so we are Eco UNESCO. We were founded in 1986 by a group of young people, and our aim is to empower young people who are involved with us to help our environment. Eco UNESCO is also proud to be one of UNESCO's affiliated clubs and a Sustainable Development Goals ambassador. So that links in really well with this week, so Eco Week. So before I actually kick off, whoever is joining us, if you want to just pop into the chat where you're calling from and how many people are actually viewing, that'll be great. And then we have, so 1 second, we have Katie here. So Katie Ryan is part of Eco UNESCO. She coordinates our Learning to Change programme by facilitating the delivery of environmental workshops all around the island of Ireland. And Katie is going to chat to us a little bit about the introduction to SDGs. So she's going to do like an overhaul of all of the SDGs. So I am going to pass you over to Katie, and you can share your screen. Fire ahead, Katie.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Antonia. First of all, lovely to kick off Eco Week with you guys and SDG Week as well. As Antonia said, if you could put into the chat just the name of the school or youth group or organisation that you're coming from, and also the number of people that are watching with you guys. So just so that we can get an idea of numbers. I'm going to share my screen now, so just give me one moment. And we will kick off our session on the introduction to Sustainable Development Goals. So a little bit of backstory and some of our learning outcomes that we're hoping to have a look at today. So we'll be really looking at what is sustainability and what does those two words mean, sustainable development. We'll be also looking at bringing better understanding of the Sustainable Development Goals, also called the Global Goals, to yourselves, and also having a look at how we can actually take action as individuals, as a community, as a country as well, on sustainable development. So that's our kind of plan for the next half an hour. I will be asking you to put some answers into the chat box and to discuss things with whoever you're sitting with, or if you're alone, please just have a moment of reflection and we will take some ideas in the chat box later on. So to kick us off then, we need to think a little bit about the big problems before we go into how we can solve them. So in terms of what are the big problems that are faced by people in your community, in Ireland, in the world, that's the question that we're going to ask. And I really would like you to think like you're the president. And I think that's an important piece because it's not just the problems that are affecting us every day, like maybe we've too many emails to respond to or too much homework to do, but we really want to think on a bigger scale, on a more global scale. So imagining you're the president, what are the problems faced by people in your community, in Ireland and in the world? I'm going to give yourselves 2 minutes just to chat to the person that you're with in the room. And then if you could, it would be lovely to share some of your ideas in the chat box as well, to get some feedback from yourselves. So let's kick it off with 2 minutes on what are our problems, our big problems faced by the world. Antonio, while they're doing that, will you monitor the chat box just to see if there is any content coming in?
Yeah, of course. I can see we have some people coming in from Westport though, so very welcome.
Oh, fabulous.
Yeah.
For yourself, Antonio, what do you think some of the big problems might be?
Oh gosh.
I don't You're based in Dublin, right?
Yeah, based in Dublin. I think it's probably, for me, I think we're lucky enough to have sort of a good transport system, but it could be a bit better. So it could be better at linking different parts to Dublin. Yeah, and more often, basically.
Yeah, so I would agree with you. For me, I live in a rural community in the Midlands, so transport, it becomes an even bigger issue once you kind of leave the big cities. So it would be wonderful for transport to be more accessible and also more sustainable. So that's the question for you guys. What are the problems faced by people in your community, in Ireland and in the world? Chat to the person that you're with and then put your ideas into the chat box as well. That would be great.
Yeah, and anyone else who's just joined in, if you just want to let us know where you're calling from or and how many people are also in participating in this.
Wonderful. So I know a couple of people had let me know when we were talking about this problem this morning, they were talking about things like equality is a big problem for a lot of people. Other people were mentioning things like the homeless crisis and the housing crisis in general in Ireland. That's an issue faced by our community. Some people were thinking more globally and thinking about the problems faced by the world, such as political instability or climate change. That's both world and Ireland and even in our own communities. So there's so many of these big issues that we're talking about and big problems. And we really want to have a look today about sustainable development and how we can apply sustainable development to these issues as well. So let's move on then. So when we're talking about the word sustainable development, it's a big topic, and you might have seen this in your schools, in your youth groups, or even in your workplace. Around these 17 sustainable development goals, these different symbols. But what is sustainable development really? What do you think it means to be sustainable or to engage in sustainable development? If you want to add your ideas into the chat box as well, chat to the person that you're with in the room. What do you think sustainable development might mean? I'll give you another minute for that one.
Paula also just sent in a quick message prior to that for the previous question, just chatting about poverty, flooding, equality, climate change, education, sustainability, and biodiversity. So it's all of it.
Yeah, so many different options there. Yeah, definitely all big issues, and some bigger than others in terms of whether they're affecting the local community or the wider community. Obviously, we have a big issue around biodiversity in Ireland and trying to increase our biodiversity and different rewilding projects that are happening in that. Poverty, we're actually going to touch on poverty later on in this talk around Ireland's SDG number 1, how we're doing around poverty. Maybe it'll surprise or shock a few of us. We'll have to wait and see. But what does sustainable development mean? So let's kick off then. Sustainable development is development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. Now, I know this is a mouthful, so please don't worry too much, but we do need to think about two things when we're looking at this. The first part is the fact that it's talking about people today and people that don't even exist yet, all the way down in the future generations. So there's those two pieces that must be thought about when we're talking about sustainable development. The second thing is around the word needs. So if we look around the room that you're sitting in right now, what are the needs? What are the must-haves for us to survive in this? So for me today, I need to have a building. So housing is really important, or shelter is really important. I need to have clean air to breathe. So we need to think about our climate and our life on land and biodiversity. Another need is I actually need electricity to be able to do this because we are based online. So then I need to think about our energy sources and where they're coming from. So sustainable development is about all of that and probably more. So it's about all of the needs of the present and all of the needs of the future generations. One thing to note is that it was mentioned for the first time and a definition was given to it officially back in 1987. So in the Brundtland Report called Our Common Future. So when we think about sustainable development, we sometimes think of it as a new concept, but it's not. It's been around for almost 4 decades, and it should have been on the high agenda back then, but now it's being pushed to the front of our agendas now. So really thinking about sustainable development in terms of those two things. So sustainable means to be able to carry on this way for a period of time without the negative effects or failing to reach goals. So imagine when we're talking about sustainability, are you able to do this activity multiple times for the next 100 years without impacting the planet or people in any way, shape, or form? So when we think about our purchasing, all of the clothes that we buy, are we able to continue buying in the same manner that we're buying now? Or is it going to have some sort of negative effect on the planet or on people? So that's what sustainability is. Development then is all about growth and change and improving and achieving progress and moving to the next stage. I think one thing that people often think about with development is that they always think it has to be bigger and better, but sometimes we also have these theories called degrowth, where it's actually thinking and innovating to scale back and improve things at a smaller scale. So degrowth is also part of development. It has to be about achieving progress, but progress doesn't always mean bigger and better. So sustainable development comprises of those two words. Now, this is the part that most people might have seen before when they talk about sustainable development. These are our 17 sustainable development goals. So there are 17 of them, touching on different areas. Each of those goals has a number of targets. So we also have 169 targets that are applied to each of these goals. And each country all around the world is responsible for having a look at how best we can achieve these goals before 2030. Now, sometimes you might hear these goals called the global goals, so please bear that in mind just in case that one comes up in the future. But each goal has its own targets. So for example, the goals that we have today, the 17 of them are being applied in Ireland and in every country. And the ones that are being applied in Ireland, we're going to have a look at how well we're doing in each of them later on as well in this talk. So a little bit of background to the Sustainable Development Goals. So most people are thinking that they're new, and relatively, I guess, maybe they are, but they did have come a long way over the last 30 years. So taking us all the way back to the Earth Summit in June of 1992, back in Rio de Janeiro in Brazil, more than about 178 countries came together and assigned a really important agenda called Agenda 21. This was a comprehensive plan on global partnership and around sustainable development, all about improving human lives and protecting the environment. So that was all the way back in 1992. Now, just remember, back in 1987 was the first time we heard of the word sustainable development and gave it a proper title. So it was already, 5-6 years down the line before they put it into practice, I guess you could say. Fast forward then again another 8 years, you've got the Millennium Development Goals, which many of us might remember as being kind of the Kickstarter for the Sustainable Development Goals. The Millennium Development Goals, there were 8 of them, really focused on poverty and the basic human rights. So life, shelter, and food was really what they were trying to achieve. One thing that's really different between the Sustainable Development Goals and the Millennium Development Goals is that the Millennium Development Goals were mainly focused on people in the global south. So we're looking at Asia, Africa, and South America. We were kind of saying, we are trying to support you guys to improve your livelihoods, but we weren't necessarily majorly involved in it. Now, the big question is, were they successful? A lot of people would say they were relatively successful because a number of mortality rate dropped, livelihood increased for a lot of developing countries in the global south. So relatively successful. Now, the next thing that's of high importance is the Rio conference, Rio Plus 20 in 2012. This kick-started the idea of what's after the Millennium Development Goals? What comes next? So we moved forward in 2012 and we started thinking about the Sustainable Development Goals. This was the first time they were thought about. They were worked on at open working groups, at UN political forums, all the way up until their final draft in 2014, and then signed in during the Paris Agreement in 2015. So in 2015, the General Assembly began the negotiation process on the post-2015 development agenda. So what's going to happen after this? So the process culminated in the subsequent adoption of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development with our 17 SDGs, or Sustainable Development Goals, at its core, and the UN Sustainable Development Summit happened in 2015. Now, I think what's really important is we see 2030 out there on the edge. We're about 5 years away from the end of our 2015 Sustainable Development Goals. So there's a question around what's next, which we'll come to a little bit later. So whilst I have everyone here, let's have a little think about the most important Sustainable Development Goal for you and your community. I work in education. I really do believe that quality education is vital for young people. So SDG number 4 is the most important for me. Without it, we wouldn't be able to have the skills and the innovation, the creativity to think a little bit more critically about our lives. What I'd like you guys to do is, whoever you're sitting with, or if you're alone, have a moment of reflection on the most important SDG for you and put it into the chat and give one reason as to why you think it's the most important SDG for you guys.
I think this is a really hard question.
Do you have a goal that's important to you, Antonia?
I think I'd be along the same lines as you, but also living in Dublin, then I think probably like sustainable cities and communities. So
Yeah.
maybe number 11, but then also living by the sea. It's also like there's several different ones.
Yeah, life below land, even life on land.
Yeah.
Or life below water, sorry, or life on land. Yeah, I think it depends on what is important to you in your own life. Maybe it's in your own career, your own passions. I also am really passionate about food, and I think it's really important that we think a little bit about where our food is coming from. So for me, things like responsible consumption or life on land or even zero hunger all kind of link in together on that one for me.
Yeah, I think you'll probably go across several different ones.
Yeah, that is a possibility. It's all about thinking a little bit on our own goals in life, not just the SDG goals as well. So if you do have a sustainable development goal that you're interested in, please pop it into the chat. I can see that Paula has said poverty. So zero poverty, so the first goal, because no poverty without money. We can't get housing, food, education, healthcare. That is a very fair point. Maybe that's the one that is one of the pillars for a few people. Absolutely. Really nice. And thank you for sharing your ideas. So jumping forward then, the Sustainable Development Goals. So we've talked a little bit about what they are. So we've got 17 goals, 169 targets, and they are all connected, a little bit like what you said, Antonia. They are going to connect in with one another. I think one thing that's really important to note is that the word sustainability is a little bit like an umbrella term, and then underneath it we have different pillars. Some people think of it as a house, which we have here. I like to think of it as an umbrella. But under our house of sustainability, we have 3 pillars: environmental, social, and economic. And all of our goals fall into one or more of those categories. So if we look back at our environmental ones, any ideas what ones they could be? Even Antonia, if you want to shout one out.
Yeah, so life on land, any climate action, sustainable cities as well, communities.
Very good. Sometimes I forget about that one as an environmental one, but you're absolutely correct. We also need our green spaces and need to think a little bit about our environment that we're living in. So yeah, maybe 11, 13, 14, 15, even things like renewable energy are going to play out into that too. We also have our social sustainable development goals. So these are kind of more connected with people. So they're things like your quality education, gender equality, reduced inequalities, poverty, health, hunger. They're things that really are affecting humans. So you're talking, or humans directly, you're talking about environment, talking about the planet, social, talking about people. And then the last one is economic. So talking about kind of people's jobs. So thinking about our good jobs and economic growth, innovation and infrastructure, even things like responsible consumption and energy, they're all going to connect in with one another. So there are 17 SDGs. One thing to note as well, and I don't think we've mentioned this yet, is number 17 is a really interesting goal. People often forget about it, but I like to think of it as like if we were talking about a cake, it's like the cherry on top. This Partnership for the Goals, SDG, really does talk about connecting all of the other goals to one another, but more than that, it's also talking about how we as people can work together to achieve these goals. So it's talking about who should be at the table to have that conversation and how do we actually achieve these goals together. Now, a question for you guys is what happens after 2030 and why 2030 as well? 2030 was set as the goal end date for the Sustainable Development Goals because in terms of our carbon budgets and our carbon emissions, which is linking in with climate change, if we are to achieve and maybe not go over the 1.5 degree Celsius mark, we would need to do this by 2030. So our carbon budget kind of runs out at 2030. So that means that all the carbon emissions that we have to use, we need to be really reducing them dramatically before then. So that was the reason it was chosen. But what happens after 2030? So are we going to have more goals? So some people think yes. Some people think that we're going to have sustainability transition goals. That could be a possibility. So maybe it's thinking about sustainability in the digital age and moving sustainability forward in that space. Others think that they're going to just update the goals and targets by taking into account different needs of high and low income countries and also how they've been achieved. So, for example, in Ireland, we're doing well in some goals and not so well in others, actually, very poorly in others. So, maybe what we'll do is we'll update our targets to suit the needs of the country. Or another option, new goals. I don't know how effective that would be. It seems like a lot of work and many years of work to try to create these new goals. And our goals are quite strong and they do cover quite a broad territory. So yeah, that's what might happen. Nobody necessarily knows at this point, but these have been suggestions at the last UN meeting. So I think one thing to note is that young people are part of a system and they were born into an already destructive system. So we need to remember that unsustainable development and the impact that we're having on the planet, it's not our fault, but we are part of the solution. And that's a really important piece. So although I can say I didn't personally cause it 40 or 50 years ago, I am part of the solution because if I don't change my ways today, I will then be part of the problem as well. So we need to take on just a small amount of the burden, not the whole burden. We also need systems change. So we really need to get governments involved and industries involved in different organizations. So that's schools and youth groups and adult education organizations. All of us need to come together as well as all the other buildings and companies and organizations to really come together to look at sustainability, hold ourselves accountable for our unsustainable practices and take responsibility for our lack of action. Now, a question on how well Ireland is doing. Somebody had mentioned, I think it was Paula, you said, had mentioned around poverty as being a key piece of information for us. So if you actually have a look at our image here, this was taken from the UN SDG index. So this is a way that we're able to measure how well we are doing as a country and how well all countries are doing in terms of our sustainable development goal achieving our targets. So currently we're sitting at about a B grade. So we've got about 78% of targets met in some of our categories. In others, we're not doing so well. So as you can see, the green category is on the rise. We've only got one in the green category, which is quite disappointing, but it's no poverty. So that doesn't mean that poverty doesn't exist in the country, but what it does mean is that in terms of the targets that are set for this, for example, making sure that people live above the poverty line, we are either maintaining it or we are hoping to achieve all of those targets by 2030. So that's really positive. Obviously, we're very well aware that we do have issues around poverty in Ireland on the ground. So maybe there's questions about is the reporting as accurate as it needs to be? And that's something we would need to bring up with government. Other issues that we can see here is most of ours are kind of yellows, oranges, and even reds. The reds are the ones that we are absolutely nowhere near to being achieved. So things like zero hunger, climate action, partnership for the goals, and worst of all is our responsible consumption and production. Unfortunately, Ireland is a leader in the world and definitely in Europe, we're number one. We have the highest amount of textile waste per person per year, sitting in at about 58 kilos of waste per year per person. Now, this is just textile waste. So when we're talking about that, we're talking about clothing waste. The average in Europe is about 26 kilos per person per year, which is a really shocking statistic that we're almost double in terms of our counterparts across the seas. So it's definitely something we as a country need to be looking at and need to be tuning into a little bit more. So what are the actions that we need? So we do need to reduce our emissions. So for the planet, we need to phase out our fossil fuels and improve public transport and waste less. That's all really important stuff. for our food, we do need to achieve some sort of transformation with our agriculture. We are a really, Ireland is and has been an agricultural hub for many, many years. So we really want to support farmers towards a just transition to more sustainable crops. We also need to have a look at our own lifestyle. So these are our individual changes, thinking about things like buying less and reusing more. So they're the kind of short actions. Now, I'm going to give yourselves a couple of minutes. Maybe we say 2 minutes. Chat to the person that you're with in the room. And I'd like you to add some ideas into your chat about what do we need? What are our actions that we can take towards achieving a more sustainable future? So I'll give you 2 minutes thinking a little bit about the actions that we need towards sustainable development. If you want to put your ideas into the chat, that would be brilliant too.
Paula just had a quick question. What was the kgs of textile waste?
I think it was between 56 and 58 kilos for last year per person. And this, it just in comparison to our counterparts in other European countries sitting in or between 24 and 26 kilos of waste, it's just such a shocking disparity. We are so far ahead, but in a negative way. Like we shouldn't be wasting that much textile. We also need to think about when we recycle things, people often think that it's a really positive action, and while it is a positive action, our waste is not being recycled often in Ireland. It's actually being sent abroad to be recycled. So then we need to think a little bit more about our emissions that are being that are higher because we have to recycle them in other countries. You might have heard of like the things like the Great Garbage Patch in the oceans, or you might see things in like Rana Plaza in Bangladesh, where industry is pretty much all based around dealing with our waste. So although we don't see it, others are affected by the waste. So it's a really, really important point. So yeah, so what are some other actions that we can take around either in our local communities or in our local classes or towns, whatever that might be? What are your thoughts, Antonia? What are some actions that you think communities could take or schools could take?
I'd say even like the swap shops and stuff like that. That idea for textile waste is quite cool because a lot of the time, I think younger people are a lot better than what maybe I was when I was in school. But a lot of the time people actually do share a lot more clothes now than what they would, because people don't. It's a whole you wear it once and you can't wear it again. But I don't think it's that as bad anymore.
Yeah.
But it's a really good idea just having a swap shop in your school. Like you could easily just bring in whatever clothes and then trade for what you'd like or what you don't like.
Absolutely. Even things like I know we've done like book swaps or toy swaps, clothes swaps, even food swaps. I know at this time of year there's like an abundance if you grow your own stuff, or even if you're out walking. There's usually tons of apples in the trees and berries along the roads and stuff. So even thinking about how best to use our native ingredients, what's around us. Even just small changes to our lifestyle. We don't all need to be vegan, and there's also issues around questions if that is the best option in terms of food lifestyle. And although I'm not a vegan, I do try to eat predominantly vegetarian foods and try to eat more local foods. And I think that's a really important point, because if we're always trying to eat stuff, but it's not grown locally, we also have to think about our carbon emissions there as well. There's a really lovely calculator I can try to pull up for you afterwards around carbon emissions and food. So it kind of calculates how far did our food have to come to actually end up on our plate. And the same with our clothing, how far does it actually have to travel? I can see that Paula put into the chat more awareness around biodiversity, reducing the use of chemicals on the land, absolutely. Even our heating and our houses, how do we do that more sustainably? Very nice. Growing native fruit trees, lovely. Secondhand shops. There's tons of charity shops and secondhand shops, and it's lovely to support these organizations as well by putting in our clothes. Using the term vintage shops, not secondhand, fair enough. That's a good point as well. Bookshops, book swaps, apologies, clothes swaps, joining tidy towns, communities, cycling and not driving. That's a huge one. Even trying to use public transport rather than taking the car, even if it was just one day a week. If everybody made that small switch, the public transport service would have to improve. But on top of that, we would be able to reduce our impact a little bit. I can see that Tanya also mentioned that they've actually held some clothing and accessory swap shops in their school in the last couple of years, which is really important around fast fashion. Very nice. Another way to get involved is to be loud and spread awareness. Now, I don't necessarily mean that you need to be on the streets and protesting. That's not necessarily what I'm trying to articulate. What I do think being loud and spreading awareness is, it's talking to your friends, talking to your family, and asking questions and trying to understand and make the decision for yourself. Being informed is a really important point. So doing your research, getting involved with organizations that are trying to achieve the same goals that you are trying to achieve. Not everybody needs to be on the picket line. I think we can all do it in our own way, for sure. But I think one aspect that we can do is to work together and demand change. When we're talking about this, demanding change, that means like getting in contact with your local politicians, your local TDs, asking the question to supermarkets and shops, if you're trying to shop with less plastic, for example, give them back the plastic at the end of the shop. They won't like it, but they'll start to realize that they need to change their own habits. Emails, phone calls. Going back to this question on being loud and spreading awareness, asking questions to people is really important. It might not have a massive impact immediately, but if we all start asking the same questions, they'll start to have to change. For the last piece, I like to think of our actions as 4 steps, 4 levels. So we need to think globally but act locally. So we don't all need to go out and do stuff all over the world. It's actually really great if we can do stuff in our local community. And level 1 of that is being a sofa superstar. You don't need to do big changes. So for example, I'm sitting on a chair right now in my office. I'm looking around at some changes that I could make immediately that would have a small impact on the planet. And I can see that there is a plugged in, but it's for a lamp that I'm not using at the moment, but it is turned on. A small change could literally just be turning off the switch on the lamp. Have a look around where you're sitting right now. What are some other changes that you could make that would impact the people, the planet, and more? So have a look around, and how can you be a sofa superstar? You can put your ideas into the chat box as well. What about for yourself, Antonia? Do you have any sofa superstar ideas from where you're sitting?
I probably can unplug my laptop because it's charged.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be a big thing, but it could be things like unplugging your laptops, turning off lights when they're not in use. Small things. Even maybe if you're on your phone, texting your family, texting your sister, tell them that you're on a workshop about sustainability, and tell them one new thing that you learned. Sharing our knowledge is another way that we can take an action. It doesn't necessarily mean to be a physical action. It could be communicating with others. I'm trying to have a look around my own room here. Even things like, if you're in schools, like using the back of the paper every time rather than only using one side. Paula said turning off the heating last week, but it's freezing today. That is true. You need to plan accordingly. But yeah, definitely there's so many small actions that we can take that can impact the planet. Maybe today's day is everybody brings their lunch to school or to their office in reusable container. So making sure that everybody is using reusable containers. I know in my own office, when we go out for lunch to eat in local restaurants, if we're getting takeaway, we bring our own container with us. And it took a moment for them when the restaurants saw us turning up with all of our lunch boxes for our takeaway, but after one try, they were happy to oblige. So it's small actions that we can do. The next level to that is all around being a household hero. So that's thinking about the house. So like Paula and Tanya were saying, around insulation in the home, thinking about our buildings. Maybe it is about having more, bringing carpets into a room that's particularly cold. Lots of ways that we can improve our livelihood there. Being a neighborhood nice guy, so joining your tidy towns clubs, rewilding, planting native trees, all that sort of good stuff. And then the last one is the exceptional employee. So moving it bigger. So that's either in your workplace or even bigger than that. How do we get involved at a national or global level? So yeah, I just want to remind you guys that although we are the first generation that can put an end to poverty, which is wonderful. We are also the last generation that can put an end to climate change. So I think that's a really important and valid point, is that climate change is happening and we are the last generation to be able to deal with it effectively. So our actions today are so important, and it's imperative that we do get involved and do get the bigger corporations also involved in it. That's me. All done. I want to say thank you for everybody joining today. If you do have any further questions, please stick them into the chat box. I also have my the emails info at Eco UNESCO here. That's our general email, but I'll also put my own personal work email into the chat just in case you would like maybe some more information or some more feedback or whatever that might be. So yeah, so I want to say thank you guys so much. I run our workshops program, as Antonia mentioned. So if you are a school, a youth group, an adult education centre, and you might be interested in engaging in more conversation around sustainable development, we do a wide variety of workshops, some on fast fashion, some on waste, marine life, whatever that might be, for young people aged about 10 to 18, but even 10 to 25, depending on the group. So please get in touch, and it'd be lovely to meet some of you guys in person. So thank you. Back to you, Antonia.
Cool, thank you so much. We actually only have like a few minutes left. So if you guys have any questions, you can unmute yourself or even pop them in the chat. But in the meantime, we actually had some questions come in already.
Okay.
So do you think the Sustainable Development Goals will be achieved?
It's a tough question. Do I think they will be achieved? Probably not, to be quite honest with you. I think as a whole, I don't think we'll achieve all of them. And I don't think every country will be able to achieve all of them, because we also need to take into account where we're starting from. So different countries have a different starting point. But I do think that there are countries that are on their way to achieving a lot of the targets. We're only obviously, as Ireland, we're only on our way to achieving one full goal, but I still think even within that goal, there's still space to improve. Because we need to remember that these goals are just the baseline. We want to go much further than that. So the fact that we are in the red and all not doing particularly well on 4 or 5 of those goals, it's quite disheartening to hear. And I think we, as a community, as a country, need to come together and really advocate for more engagement on the Sustainable Development Goals.
Cool. And another one that came in was, how can teachers, mentors incorporate it into their like daily workings within a school, maybe, or wherever
cool.
they're working?
That's a really good point. I think sustainable development doesn't have to be a standalone topic or standalone subject, although we are looking at having one in secondary schools starting next in 2025, next academic year. On the daily, though, it could be really small things. If you're talking about your science classes, just relating it back to people, relating it back to planet. Art classes, having a look at how we can reuse materials, making sure that paints and our supplies are non-toxic, and if we're washing them down the sink, making sure that we're also aware that the sink goes somewhere. So we need to make sure that whatever we're putting into the correct bins is accurate, and holding people accountable for that as well. So yeah, that's what I would say. There's lots of resources on our website that we can link you to. We also have our wonderful Young Environmentalist Awards, action-based award scheme for young people to take action. So if your school or if your youth group or university would like to get more involved, please do let us know. Our Young Environmentalist Award kicks off now, so it'll be lovely to get you guys involved. I'll send it back over to you.
Yeah, cool. So as Katie mentioned, I was going to lead on to potentially getting involved with us. So I work on the Young Environmentalist Awards, so I'll plug that as much as I can. So that's really good. So it's environmental eco action projects. And then we also have a workshops team. So they have a vast amount of workshops where they go and travel all over Ireland. So it's online, or they can also do in person. And then we have our youth groups. So we have our YSDs, so Youth for Sustainable Development. So we have online in-person ones based in Maynooth, Galway, Drogheda, and also Dublin. And then we also have online. So that's a 12-week program, fully free of charge. You can get involved. And then we have our Youth Climate Justice program. So we have a lot going on in Eco UNESCO of where people can get involved in different avenues, and depending on how much you want to get involved or how little you want to get involved. But I'm going to say a massive thank you to Katie for today. I did pop in just a link for a feedback form, so it'd be great if we can get any feedback from you guys. And I know some joined a little bit later on throughout the day, so even if you want to pop in where you're viewing from and how many are participating, that would be great. As you know, it's Eco Week, so we have a few more coming up. I'm just going to run through these real quick. So today is all done, but you can still sign up on Eventbrite, and I did actually put that link into the chat as well. So they're still on Eventbrite. You can join in any of the days. So we have our climate change, biodiversity. I'm not going to run through them all. There's a lot. And so it's at 10 and half 1 the same times as it was today. And a massive thank you to everyone. A massive thank you to Katie. Thanks for coming on. It was a quick chat and session, but it was really good just to get a quick introduction to the SDGs, because I think for myself, there seems to be a lot, and it can be quite confusing of where to start and where to get involved. So if you guys do have any questions, I did put Katie's email as well directly into our chat, so if you do need to get in contact with her. And then also you can get in contact with us at info@ecounesco.ie. So thank you all so much for coming, and hopefully we'll see you later on during the week.
Wonderful. Have a lovely day, everyone.
Yeah, enjoy. Thank you, guys.
Bye.
Bye.